It's summer, and for me that means time to ferment on the hot porch with Kveik. Imperial Organic Yeast has a summer seasonal to add to the fun. Imperial A46 Bartleby is a Hornindal Kveik strain that's a great choice for anything from a traditional Norwegian farmhouse ale to a hazy IPA. When fermented at the high end of its temperature range, that's 98 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 C, Bartleby will produce a lot of pineapple, apricot, and peach aromas. It's a delicious way to turn summer heat into fast fermentations and tasty beers. Ask your local homebrew shop for Imperial's Summer Seasonal A46 Bartleby and check out Imperial Organic Yeast at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, July 8th, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Matt Giovanisci talks about his quest to brew his version of the perfect New England IPA. After 3 years of experimentation and equipment upgrades, he thinks he's got it. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, and if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewer's logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing. And thanks very much to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. I took this past week off from posting the show. No good reason other than just, to take a break. We used to take the whole month of June off for family vacations and, the homebrew conference and all that. But, just being stuck at home the last year and still easing into normality this year, there's really no need to take the whole month off. So we're back in the saddle this week after that just short break. Steve and I got together Monday to shoot 2 video episodes and 1 audio episode. Financial supporters will see the first of the video episodes this Friday before the general public sees them next week, along with the behind-the-scenes video for upper-tier Patreon supporters. This one is about my salute to New Glarus, Wisconsin Belgian Red. And I say salute because I wasn't trying to brew a clone. I was just trying to get kind of in the neighborhood. I brewed a Belgian-inspired brown ale and racked it onto a 3-pound can of dark, sweet cherry puree in the keg. I didn't ferment it, just put it in the refrigeration, and I wanted to maintain that sweetness, kind of like I did the pineapple puree with the New England IPA I did in that previous batch. So I don't want to spoil it too much. It's not exactly the target beer, but it's still pretty tasty. Steve and I also shot a video episode about one of his beers that he kind of forgot about for around a year in the secondary fermenter in one of his fridges. He had a lot going on, health-wise and otherwise, this past year. So you'll have to wait to see how that turned out. Our friends and sponsors Ricky and Kelly at Groenfell and Havoc Meaderies up in Vermont have a couple of fun summer promotions going on. There's the Summer Mead Case, which gives you 10% off a 24-pack of refreshingly tart meads. You get 8 cans of Mead-A-Readaville with pineapple, orange, and lime, 8 cans of Sour Mead Maker, a raspberry lime Ricky Mead, and 8 cans of Psychopomp Cherry Mead. But wait, that's not all. There's also the Midsummer Bundle by Groenfell and Havoc, which includes 2 4-packs of Buckland Mead, 2 4-packs of Valkyrie's Choice, and a wooden or a horn tankard, which is, required equipment for drinking fun craft mead outside in the summertime. A tankard made out of wood or horn, actual horn. Again, all products are 10% off with those bundles, and you get free shipping for orders over $70. So how fun is that? We love Ricky and Kelly and everybody at Groenfell and Havoc. They make some delicious stuff. Check it all out at family-owned and operated Groenfell.com. That's GROENNFELL. Okay, you've heard me talk about the YouTube video that Matt Giovanisci made on his Brew Cabin channel, of which I was a cameo. I had a cameo. It was a parody of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Matt brewed the final version of his NEIPA recipe in that video. But I wanted to sit down with Matt and get the details of how that recipe evolved and what he considered the keys were to its success. Matt Giovanisci, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. The first time we talked, you had built or were building your perfect brewing setup, and we talked about all the details of that. And then you you asked me to do a little cameo in the video that I've been talking about on the show, this 2001: A Space Odyssey parody on your Brew Cabin channel on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And so we got to see in detail how your system works, and it's awesome, and I'm jealous. But what I wanted to talk to you about, in that video, you claim that you made the perfect New England IPA, or NEIPA, mm-hmm. and it took you 3 years. So, was it worth all the time and effort, all the research, all the money and equipment and all that to build this beer?
I think so. And I use perfect in extreme air quotes, it's perfect to me and what I was going for. I found it really, I know there's a lot of talk about it being like sort of a lazy style because it's hazy and, it's a really difficult beer to make. And I found that challenging very early, and my first attempt at it was not very good. And I'm like, okay, this is something I'm going to try very, very hard at mastering if I can do it. And honestly,
what wasn't good about that first iteration?
Well, I started with a kit. I remember I got a kit from, I forget where, but it was clear. It was clear, and it tasted more just like a regular, like a good juicy pale ale, but not what I considered to me. When you look at beers like Julius from Treehouse and even Trillium beers, and then here in Colorado we have Juicy Bits from Weldworks, and I've even had Hill Farmstead beers that I thought were really. I mean, all of those beers were just like they were. Another one of my favorites out here is Outer Range, and they make a beer called In the Steep that I love so much, and I just. I never asked, any of the brewers how they did. I sort of just reversed engineered what the variables that I liked. And the first beer that I made wasn't anything like those beers. And so I set out on this journey to sort of like see if I could do it just based on, just a lot of reading, really, a lot of like forum hunting and trial and error.
Yeah. And a lot of information has come out in the past 3 years on the style.
Yeah, it's been helpful, honestly.
And you cited, before we turned on the mics, you cited a particular publication that we're familiar with here on the show. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so one of the, actually this didn't happen till later, and it really sort of skyrocketed the evolution of it. It kind of like sped up the process. But Scott Janish's book, The New IPA, when that book came out, I bought it immediately because a lot of what I had read prior to him creating that book was on his website. So I know he had an article that was really important to me, which was called Chasing Mouthfeel, because, each variable that I tried, it was like, okay, I'm going to get the hops right now, and then I'm going to get the mouthfeel right, and then I'm going to work on the color, and then I'm going to work on, drinkability and sweetness. And there's all these different variables that I found in the style that I kind of tried to master each one individually. And then so his website was super helpful. Them starting Sapwood Cellars and their videos were really helpful. Michael Tonsmeyer and Scott Janish. And then when his book came out, I bought that, and it's like, I think I read it in a week and just started highlighting and dog-earing it, and then I have a list of specific things that really stood out to me that I was like, oh, I need to try that and see if that's like the key to what I'm going after.
Yeah, I noticed that in your video, in both there's the parody video, which is awesome and out there. You talk about this, but you also talk about there. If you click on the link in the in the description below, you can go to a page with some behind the scenes videos. And there's something called the director's cut, where you actually go into kind of more of the detail, without the fun stuff.
Just a voiceover and all the footage of the actual brew day. Yeah.
But one of those things is you go to extreme lengths to keep out all oxygen. I mean, it's not only just purging, kegs or whatever, and hoping that, as you fill it, there's a barrier of CO2 and things like that. You kind of create a closed system, even in dry hopping and things like that, where everything is purged and, there's like no oxygen touching the beer theoretically.
Yeah, I got really into I think it's called low-DO brewing, right? Like low dissolved oxygen brewing, where you sort of, the idea of limiting oxygen even in the hot side and then the cold side as well. And that was a rabbit hole. That was that can get really extreme. But I found that when to be honest, I'd never had a beer turn brown on me. I mean, if I pour a glass of it and I leave it out overnight, that's like what happens with that style of beer, where it'll like sort of oxidize. And I've never had that happen like in the keg. If I don't drink the beer for a while and the beer sits in the the keg line, I've had it, the first couple of seconds of the pour might be brown, and I've had glasses that sat out overnight because you forgot to drink them, or you passed out before you could drink it. Those beers would turn brown, but never in the keg. Even before I had done all this like crazy oxygen reduction stuff. But I think I was just drinking the beer too quickly. So, but I don't know if it was causing any issues with like slight coloration or slight oxidation. Where you get, for me, when I drink those beers. And it's one of those things I'm sensitive to. I'm not very sensitive to a lot of, like diacetyl is not something I can taste, unfortunately, but a lot of my friends can. Not that I have a problem with diacetyl in this style of beer, but I can really taste oxidation. I immediately, not just from looking at the beer, but like I can taste that caramely sweet, that I don't really like personally in that style. So I've been trying to go for more of a lighter beer. And then when you go for a lighter looking beer, then you can really start to see that color variation. So it became like, very, very important to me to limit oxygen in every single process, as much where I felt it was like, because there was some times where it was overkill. Like you could like get rid of all the oxygen in the hot liquor tank by boiling the water first and getting rid of all the oxygen. And then you can build this like steam condenser that, allows you to transfer without creating any bubbles. And that got a little insane because I thought, well, when you're boiling, aren't you adding a bunch of oxygen when you boil? Because it's vigorous. So I'm like, I don't get, that side, but I still practice a lot of those things because when I started doing that, I noticed the beer tasted better to me in general, like just overall. And then all my other beers that I had made. But for 3 years, I focused on 2 styles. And it was this New England IPA style and a Kolsch style.
Now, obviously, you added some oxygen to get the yeast going in the fermenter.
Yes.
You don't want to starve your yeast of oxygen. That's bad.
Yeah, and I didn't do that for the longest time. I just did like an aggressive splash into the fermenter for forever. Mainly because I watched this video, and this is so stupid. And I watched this video. I think it was Northern Brewer, and they were brewing a beer with Will Wheaton, and they had brought a little like can of oxygen to oxygenate the beer, and then he had said something that was like, I don't like keeping oxygen in my house because it's an explosive tank, it's flammable. And I'm like, yeah, I don't want that either. And I just sort of avoided buying oxygen. I just heard that little tidbit and I avoided oxygen. And then finally I decided, like I had watched enough videos from like White Labs and Chris, I think his name's Chris White, right? He talked a lot about how the and you read his book, the yeast book. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do oxygen. And I think I have better fermentations with oxygen just from a pure anecdotal, just I don't have as much lag time. And I do starters now, even with, a yeast like Imperial, because I do use A38 juice for my recipe. And that was the yeast I've been using really kind of since the beginning when it was in cans, when I was starting to do the style. And I still did starters because I just wanted to make sure I had a really good fermentation.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's attack each of these components. I mean, what do you want to start out with? What was the first component of the beer that you approached first, and how did you start making tweaks?
So I remember the first recipe was just, I liked, whenever I start a new style that I want to kind of master, I start with the simplest grain bill. In this case, and a lot of my information, quote unquote, came from the back of beer cans that were willing to print them, so I remember there's a brewery here in Colorado called Cerebral where they actually told you the grain on the can. So like on the can, it would say 2-row flaked oats, or it would just maybe not say flaked oats. It would say oats, wheat, and then it would say dextrin malt or dextrins or whatever. Or I think it was Carapils. That's what they wrote. So, cause that's the brand name of the dextrin malt. So but then it would never give you percentages. And so in my head, I started with just 2-row and flaked oats. That was my starting grist, right? It was 80% 2-row, 20% flaked oats. And I had done that for a while. So I stuck with that as sort of my base, and I didn't really change it. And I focused on which hops I liked first. So I tried, Citra, Mosaic, like single hop, all the way through, because I wanted to find out what each hop tasted like in that sort of style. So Citra was the easiest one to start with. Mosaic, I did Eldorado, mostly because those three hops are the combination of hops that are in Juicy Bits, because they tell you that in the can. And then I went into, as I started drinking more and more beer, I realized I liked Nelson a lot and I liked Galaxy a lot. And those were kind of the hops I stayed in, because I know Mike and Scott have that cheater hop series. And that sort of resonated with me of you can make a great beer with hops that are just already that good. So I sort of stuck with those and then started messing with different combinations and finding out, how much hops I could put into the beer and at what stages where I would get that like aroma, that juicy aroma, the tropical fruit flavors. And it was like, do you put any, I for the longest time, I put in no bittering charge. It was all, flame out or whirlpool additions and dry hop additions. And I did a lot of, I tried a lot of, do a lot of whirlpool additions and not a lot of dry hops. And then, flip that, do not a lot of whirlpool and more dry hop. And I did, like biotransformation, the dry hop during fermentation and dry hopping towards the end. And I found with all of those like sort of methods that I was getting hop creep, which is that phenomenon of when you add hops in, when you add dry hops, that it actually has an enzyme in the hop that breaks down the long dextrins, which is what I want in those, beers. I want those beers to finish more on the sweeter side or the higher gravity side. And I was getting drier beers, even though I was mashing at, 155, trying to get, those dextrins in there. And then I just ended up with like beers that would finish at 10, 10. And I'm like, okay, why are these beers turning out dry? I'm using, the right yeast and I'm mashing high. It shouldn't be this dry, at least 10, 15 or, whatever. And so I that was where Scott's book really came in handy, because he had this whole, I think this is what they do at Sapwood. I could be wrong, but they drop the temperature of the beer to 58 degrees Fahrenheit So they do like a sort of a soft crash on the beer, and then add the dry hopping later to reduce the hop creep phenomenon.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, maybe that's the secret. And so I opted out of biotransformation, like active fermentation. Plus, with active fermentation, dry hopping, I wasn't able to reuse yeast. So, because it would just get, it would just be covered in yeast, and it would take forever to wash it. And I just thought, yeah, this is not worth it. So I ended up trying that, which meant I had to figure out a way to cold crash beers. And that was when I started like the journey in low oxygen and like more, better equipment and, sort of chasing this idea. But that helped. That was like when I let the beer completely ferment. I would drop the temperature to 58 degrees and I would add a major dry hop addition. And all of a sudden the beer just like, when you pour that, out of the keg or out of a can or whatever, it just jumps out of the glass in your face. And I go, okay, I think I figured out the dry hopping schedule that resonates with what I'm going for.
But up until that point, you hadn't used a bittering charge at the beginning of the boil.
No.
So,
and that was, go ahead.
So what does that bring to it? I mean, why did you decide to try that, and what does that do for you?
So for me, this was more of a personal preference, but I was drinking beers that I thought were just sweet and didn't feel like an IPA, like a traditional, bitter IPA. And I started to, I think my palate had changed, but like, I drank, heady topper and beers, that were bitter. They were IPAs first and foremost, not New England style or the juicy style or whatever. And I started to get curmudgeonly about like a beer, an IPA should taste bitter. And, so I then found out that some New England IPA producers add a light bittering charge in the beginning just to give it that sort of bitter backbone. And when I added it, I started liking the beers more because they had that. I do like that bitter hit, from an IPA. So I noticed that my beers were turning out like very very hoppy smelling, but not very hoppy tasting. And I kind of contributed that to, I need to add more whirlpool hops as opposed to dry hops. And I needed to add some kind of bittering charge to give it just that little bit of backbone so that to balance the sweetness.
And so, I mean, this charge that you use is not big. I mean, for a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch, it's half an ounce or 14 grams of CTZ, Columbus, Tomahawk, or Zeus, which is not a lot for a big beer. No, and it wasn't until Scott, again, I think it was even he talked about on your show where it was really about the Whirlpool edition. I had been so focused on the dry hop being like a huge dry hop, right? And so then I was using a little bit of bittering and then, a decent amount of Whirlpool hops and then a really big dry hop. And I ended up flipping that a bit where I kept the bittering, which I thought I liked, and I still think I like it. And then in the Whirlpool, I experimented with different temperatures of, what would extract at, different temperatures. I know you had done experiments where you would drop the temperature to 180 degrees after the boil and dry hop then. And I think you had done it where you did different temperatures where I think 160. I think we went all the way down to 150. I don't know. I'd have to check the archives.
And I remember, but I think it was an audio episode. And I remember going, okay, maybe. And so I used to do one massive, Whirlpool edition at 180 degrees, and I would let it Whirlpool for 30 minutes. And, this is before I had equipment where it was literally whirlpooling. So I would just kind of stir it as much as I could during those 30 minutes. And then I ended up switching because I think that had come out and I'm like, okay, maybe I should do 2 different editions, like split the edition or double the edition and do it at 2 different temperatures to get 2 different flavor profiles. So I do one at flame out now, a big charge. I believe it's 56 grams and then another 56 grams, so 2 ounces at 180 degrees. So I hit it right at flame out, let it whirlpool for 15 minutes. But every single time, no matter what, it drops to 180 because now I'm inside, so I can control that temperature. But before, I would have to either keep it heated at 200 degrees because here in Colorado, it's different, right? Our boiling temperature is 20. I think in where I live now, it's 203. So we have a different hop utilization here. And so I hit it at 200 degrees and then drop it down to 180 for another 15 minutes and another hop charge. And I felt when I did that, I got way more hop flavor. And then I reduced the amount of dry hops that I was using because I felt the beer smelled awesome going into the fermenter. So I hoped that it would stay, or what would happen is that biotransformation that you get by adding dry hops during fermentation. Well, I did add hops at the end of the boil. And so that biotransformation, I think, still happens with those whirlpool hops in the beginning stages of fermentation.
Yeah, you would think the compounds would be still in there for the yeast to work on.
Right. And I heard that from Scott too, and I thought, okay, cool. I'm still doing some form of biotransformation, just and still being able to collect yeast to reuse.
And you did Galaxy and Nelson Sauvin in your whirlpool editions. How did you figure the placement of those? Did you kind of mix them like half and half between the two temperature levels?
Yes, exactly. And that was mainly to keep it easy on myself. And I've always just experimented with 2 hops. So I never wanted to I could go as far as 3 hops, and do like a combination of 3, maybe an ounce of each. And I always do them in equal parts. Because most of the hops I'm using are kind of all in the same, alpha acid area and the same like tropical fruit area, and they bring different, flavors to the table. For this particular beer, because I have multiple different, versions and styles that I've done now. But this one, I like an even split of those 2 hops specifically. And I like how they work together. And I think the Galaxy adds a lot of it keeps the haze stability in there because of I think there's Galaxy has some, I don't have the book in front of me, but it has some high amount of some chemical that keeps that haze stability. I think, but that's why with Galaxy hops, I noticed that my beers came out very hazy, like almost milky in the beginning, and then you let them kind of sit for a while. Whereas I would do Citra beers and I wouldn't get the same. They would get way clear, and I was like, I wonder if the hop choice matters in this, this haze craze of trying to make your beers as cloudy as humanly possible. To me, that's not as concerning. I don't care about that. But it was interesting to see the difference there of the same exact grist, the same exact process, different hops created a different look.
And you use 2 ounces of each Galaxy and Nelson Sauvin at each of those 2 temperature points. So that's a bunch of hops, and it's still pretty hot. So you're getting how long are you sitting at those temperatures? And you must still be getting a good amount of bitterness from that.
Oh, for sure. Much. Yeah, 15 minutes each on the hot side. Yeah.
Okay. So,
and honestly, at this, I could have probably gotten rid of the bittering charge because the hop burn has lasted on this one for a while. It is now just starting to come down. And I just think that whatever that haze stability is in those hops, it just hung around more. But I wouldn't touch the Whirlpool editions. I would probably get rid of the bittering charge if you want it a little bit less hoppy and you want to drink it a little sooner, without losing any sort of the aroma or flavor compounds.
And what about the dry hopping? How much and when did you start to dry hop?
So I for the dry hop, I used to dry hop a lot, right? And then I think it was Tom Shellhammer's study about there's like a threshold where the hops, you can actually add too much and it actually doesn't add anything to the beer. I forget, it's called something. And I saw that and I was like, oh, okay, here's a way for me not to use as many hops and actually get more yield and not really. So I ended up going right below the threshold. And that is kind of where I hung out. Is I've tried, like, once I found out that number, and that number ended up appearing in Brewfather, which is the app that I use to develop these recipes now. I have a lot of variations of this recipe in Beersmith and then in Beer Tools before that. But then I finally switched over to Brewfather, and they actually keep that calculation in there. So it kind of gives you an indicator as you're adding dry hops to your recipe if you're going over that threshold. So I keep it right below it's about to go over the threshold. And I had split the dry hops too. So I tried the biotransformation and then, literally pitching adding the hops right at pitch and then adding the hops again after fermentation. But once I got the low oxygen or the zero oxygen dry hopping method, and I learned this thing from Scott about the soft crashing to 58 degrees Fahrenheit, and then, adding the hops after fermentation, I was like, oh, I'm going to do it all there. And I'm going to do it all in one shot. And then, like, really kind of in the recent last year, I started adding CO2 to the bottom of the fermenter and pushing it up through the fermenter to mix it. And I think that's a technique a lot of commercial brewers use. So I had to I have like the CO2 tank now that is dedicated just for the fermenter, where I built this little hop dropper thing using different parts from Amazon, and like NorCal Brewing, I think, was another company that made like special hardware. And so now when I dry hop, I do it all at once. I do it after fermentation. So 7 days after fermentation, I cold crash it to 58 degrees Fahrenheit. So I usually ferment at 68 degrees. That's my temperature of choice for that yeast, which is A38 juice. And then I add all the dry hops at once with no oxygen. And then I blow CO2 up from the bottom to make sure that all the hops are mixed in to the beer. And then I let that sit for about 3 to 4 days, which I heard from, I think this was Vinny Treluzzo, I think that said, that's Russian River, that, there's a limit to how long that the hops need to sit, in the dry hop. Yeah, I think there's a point of diminishing returns.
Yeah, I think Scott Janisch talks about short dry hopping periods of just like a couple of days, and again, like you said, at cool temperatures.
Exactly.
So if you're adding the hops at that point when the yeast is done, do you think that there's biotransformation happening? If the yeast is done with the dry hops? Maybe
I would imagine.
Maybe you're not the one to ask about that.
Yeah, I'm not a biochemist. I don't know. I would say no, just because there's no active yeast, and I pull the yeast before I blow the CO2 from the bottom up. So I think I'm getting out most of the settled out yeast. So it might restart, but at 58 degrees Fahrenheit, I think it's cold enough where that specific strain will stop, working. I don't know that though, but that's kind of my process.
That's a good point. It's not a lager yeast.
Right. And yeah, the other thing too I mess with, kind of thinking about the fermentation side, is I used to just if you do like a brew in a bag, I would just dump the entire contents of the boil kettle, not with the hops, because I always use the hop screen because just for easy cleanup. I've tried doing it where the hops are just kind of free floating in the boil kettle, but I didn't notice much of a difference, and I don't mind using a little bit more hops if that's the case. But I thought in my head that the trub would add to faster yeast starting, because I've heard that trub kind of is a yeast nutrient. And I kind of thought it added to the haze. And it turns out that I get hazier beers when I put clear beer in the fermenter rather than like a Truby beer. And I found that to be fascinating, because I'm like, okay, then the trub has nothing to do with like the suspended, whatever's, the thought of it, whatever's suspended in the beer I think it's more of a chemical reaction than a suspension issue.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
The High Gravity Basic Brewing discount code is back. If you go to highdgravitybrew.com and purchase a Warthog electric system or controller and use the code EBC75BB, you'll save $75 off your purchase. And to find out the wide range of Warthog products eligible, head on over to basicbrewing.com and click on the High Gravity Basic Brewing Code Deals link on the right-hand side of the page. EBC75BB is good on the Build Your Own Brewing System page, Warthog Brew in a Bag, 2-vessel and 3-vessel systems, and, of course, the standalone controllers if you want to build your own system out of gear you already have. Take the pain out of propane for $75 off using EBC75BB on highdgravitybrew.com. That's highdgravitybrew.com. So talk about your malt bill and talk about the percentages and the components and what your reasoning behind each.
Yeah.
It's like an essay question.
Yeah. Oh boy, I didn't do so well in high school. So again, I started with this what I considered the simplest, grain bill for the style. I think you definitely need the adjuncts. So the flaked oats to me were the easiest to kind of have on hand, and I stuck with 2-row because it's, doesn't really give that much flavor. It's, it is what it is. But I noticed, or at least from my, personal taste, and again, when I say like perfect New England IPA, hard air quotes here. But for me, I don't, when it gets really orangey, almost like orange juice, I didn't like the look of that because it felt darker than like a more lighter straw pale yellow. So I started experimenting with mixing different base malts. So I went from 100, using 80% 2-row to using, 40% Pilsner malt and 40% 2-row, just to kind of lighten it up. And then I found that the Pilsner malt gave it a better flavor. And so I kind of been sticking with that mix, and I've gone, I have recipes where I just stick with 2-row or do all Pilsner, but I like having, that sort of that mix in there. And then I started mixing different adjuncts. So I added oats 100, as like my 100% adjunct. So 20%. But then I had talked to a brewer. I ended up going to a festival, that was, I think it was Big Beer in Breckenridge, and I ended up I went to like a talk, and I ended up being able to talk to a brewer, and she had showed me all the different variations that they had used as far as percentages of adjuncts. So they had gone up to 40% in flaked adjuncts.
Wow. And
she said to me that 30% was around like where, I think it was like the threshold or, diminishing returns after that. So that stuck with me, and I kind of kept it to 30%. So now I do a 15% split of wheat, flaked wheat and flaked oats. And then I've kind of just stuck with that. I mean, 30% seemed good, but I still was chasing mouthfeel. Like that was, I was always doing water chemistry, but, and I experimented with that too, because in talking with her, she had done, 2-to-1 ratio of chloride to sulfate, 3-to-1, she had gone up to 4-to-1. And, and I had done all those as well, but I never really noticed a difference in mouthfeel doing that. And then when I read Scott's book, it was 2-to-1. He kind of gave it without so many words, I think he kind of gave a definitive answer, like 2-to-1's fine. And I was like, okay, I'm sticking with that as like my, base, and I'm going to mess with the grain bill a little bit to see if I can improve the mouthfeel. So I avoided Carapils for so long as like, I didn't want to add it to my recipe because I felt, it's a branded product. It I don't know. It just didn't feel like all natural. I know it is, but it's just, I don't know. But that was huge. Huh. Adding 10% Carapils, I was like, oh, there it is. That was the mouthfeel I was looking for. And I also noticed that, I had mashed at different temperatures. So I was mashing as high as 160.
Oh, wow.
Just to try to get those dextrins in there. And then I was mashing at 150. And as soon as I added the carapils, I noticed no difference in my, what temperature I was mashing at. So I think for this recipe, I mash at 154. But I think you can mash at 150 and be completely fine and still have the same mouthfeel.
Huh. It's just adding the extra dextrins, which are hard
I think
to say.
that was what, and that also helped it to finish a little higher. So I used to finish, a lot of my beers, even with juice, would finish at like 10-15 was the lowest I could get it, or the highest I could get it. And then when I added the dextrins, then I was getting 10-18, 10-20, which was really what I was chasing. I was chasing, 10-18 to 10-20 as a finishing gravity. And the carapils, I think, is what put me over the edge as far as mouthfeel is concerned.
So you wound up with 30% pale malt, 2-row. People out there have pet peeves saying, well,
Sure.
Lots of things are 2-row. Well, okay.
Pale malt, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Brewer's malt is what Brees calls it.
Yep.
So 30% 2-row, 30% Pilsen, 15% flaked oats, 15% flaked wheat, and 10% carapils. So
yes.
So they just seem like the magic balance.
I think, and if you were gonna goose that recipe or that percentages, as long as you stick with the base malt percentage and the flaked adjuncts being a 60-30, and then carapils at 10, I think you can kind of mess with the base malts. You could do 60% Maris Otter or 60% all Brewer's pale malt or all Pilsen malt. Even you could try pale ale. I think that would be a little too dark for me. Or even like a malt that's one of those, what are they I'm trying to think of the artisan craft maltsters. You could do that. And then in the flaked adjunct department, you could go 30% all oats, you could go 30% all wheat. I'm going to experiment with 30% flaked barley for the next recipe that I'm trying this week. So I'm doing the same thing where I'm doing 60% 2-row, 30% flaked barley, and 10% carapils.
I wonder what would happen if you put a little flaked rye in there.
That would probably help the mouthfeel a bit. And I know people say it gives I think it's false. Like it gives a spicy note. That's not a thing, right? Because that's thinking of rye bread, which has caraway seed, which I think is what gives it the spiciness. But yeah, I think that would certainly help the mouthfeel, and could you like flaked rye? You're saying, right?
Yeah, or just malted rye.
Yeah, I as much as I wanted to, I've been talked out of. I wanted to try doing malted wheat instead of flaked wheat, but I was sort of talked out of that. I've not tried it, so I think it would be worth giving it a shot to go instead of a flaked adjunct, going with like a wheat or I wouldn't do flaked barley, but maybe or just regular barley, because that would defeat the purpose. But yeah, I think rye might work a lot. I know there's New England IPAs that have rye. I've tried some of them. I would.
The 100% rye beers that I've made have not been like spice bombs. I've made 100%, the sessionable, 2% beers that I've made with both just rye by itself and then rye and wheat. They're just nice and hoppy and clean, and you don't get a bunch of that, rye bread spice that everybody says that they get from it.
Yeah. Are they overly sweet?
Well, it depends on how much you add. I mean, if you if you have a finish, like the first one that I did, the 100% rye beer, I used as much as I would normally use of any other grain, and the finishing gravity was like Vic's Formula 44D. So, you can add too much.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you've got a good thing. You may not want to mess with it. I mean,
I'm willing to, like, now that I feel like I got to a place where I know I can make a good one. Now I'm more, now I can kind of broaden the horizons, right? Because what I was trying to do is master a style where if someone came over or put my beer up against a commercial example, it would be either these are both equally good or I prefer yours. And that was just my sort of pseudo goal. But really the goal for me is, do I want to go and drink it? Because I am super critical of my beers. I'd rather have friends drink it. But if I make something and it's like, ooh, I like this, and it kicks before my friends could try it, then I've done it. I've done what I set out to do. And so yeah, I'm like, I've tried different hops. Right now, I feel like I've sort of mastered it for myself. Again, hard air quotes on the perfection aspect of it. But now I'm like, yeah, let's do different yeasts and different blends and sour IPAs. And I've never done a milkshake IPA, but I'm gonna try it. I don't,
Small batch.
Yeah, small batch. Yeah.
So talk about the water chemistry. How did you tweak, and how did you know how to tweak?
Water chemistry has kind of been my thing forever. I'm in the pool industry, so that's my day job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you're bizarro me, because I have no water chemistry knowledge at all. So you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a bit. It's like the pool version of it. And so like when I got into it, it was like, oh, I fit right into this little world. And in fact, I was able to get, the company that makes pool test strips makes the testing kit for homebrewers. Huh. And so I'm like, ooh, send me one of those. So I was doing that, and then I got really into, I mean, I was always really concerned about water filtration and getting the best water to start with. So, even if I had to go out and buy gallons of like spring water, I would do that. But I would just like double or triple filter, the water that I used, because I know how bad chloramines can be in drinking water as opposed to just like in beer as well. So I was always good about that. And then when I learned that it could actually improve the mouthfeel, it's when I started going, okay, I'm going to commit to getting my water tested every quarter. So I would, because where I lived, we had two different reservoirs so it was nice because I had lived in Boulder County, and specifically Boulder, where they actually had a weekly email they would send to brewers and homebrewers that would give out the water of the week, the water test. I'm like, all right, this is great. I still didn't trust it because they would switch different reservoirs depending on, I guess, weather. And so they would warn you when they did that. So I would get an email. It's like, hey, we're now on this reservoir for the next, couple months. And it's like, okay, great. So that's when I would get my water rechecked. And plus, there's the reservoir side, and then it has to go through pipes, and it has to go through your refrigerator, it has to go through your filter or whatever it is. And so I just wanted to know exactly what was coming out of my faucet through my filter. And I needed to know exactly what that was. So when I did do my water chemistry, I knew where I could start. So I ended up I would get my water checked from Ward Labs, and I would do I had like the kit too, but it was just easier to do Ward, to be honest. And I felt more accurate as well. And I would get it checked every quarter, and then that's where I started water chemistry. And then when I got this brewery built, it was like, I have to go RO, because I don't want to check this water all the time, and I just want to know that I'm starting from zero. And I could just build any profile, I could try crazy stuff too if I wanted to. So that was fun. So now I'm starting with RO water and building it up. And I don't add too much. Like a lot of my chemical additions or my salt additions are pretty minimal. Because I feel like if you add too many parts per million of calcium chloride, it starts to get chalky. And I've had a lot of beers that had that chalkiness to it, which I do not like. So I just keep it, the ratio just to get it enough to where I think as high as I've gone on calcium chloride is like 300 parts per million. I think now I'm down to 150. I don't know what the recipe says there, but it could be as high as 200. Well, and that seems to work.
For the mash, it says 10.7 grams of calcium chloride, 3.7 grams of Epsom salt, which my mom used to soak me. One time I stepped on a nail and my foot got soaked in Epsom salt.
Yeah, and that's a diuretic apparently too. So it
nice.
be used as a laxative. Yeah.
3.7 grams of gypsum and 1.5 grams of kosher salt.
Yeah. So it says just mash on the sheet. That is for both. That's for the mash and that's the total water allocations. So I think that, for my system, I use roughly 9 gallons of water to start. So that's what's going into 9 gallons of RO water, to be clear.
So, yeah, Steve and I discovered, when I forgot to use RO water and piled more chemicals on on our first water profile sampler, I piled more chemicals on top of whatever chemicals are in my tap water.
Was in the water, yeah.
Yeah, you can taste it. You can definitely overdo the chemicals for sure. Yes,
and that's like something, there is total dissolved solids is, a problem in the pool industry, and it's a problem in homebrewing.
You have an unfair advantage.
Yeah. I know what ppm stands for. It's about as, I know how alkalinity and pH work, in a pool setting. Calcium hardness, calcium chloride, same difference.
Will this beer turn my hair green? Is the question.
No, you know why? No, because it does not have copper in it. So copper and chlorine are what causes green hair on blonde hair. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, from what I've researched, yes.
So, wrapping up, is there any other key finding that we haven't talked about that you think that brewers of this style should know?
I think the addition or the alcohol content is important when it comes to mouthfeel. So if you want that like thickness, the thickness that you get from orange juice, I found that higher alcohol beers lend a hand to that mouthfeel. Whereas, doing a session New England IPA, which I love, those beers can feel a little thinner, even though you use the exact same, percentages. So the higher alcohol, and that's why, like, if you drink a double New England IPA or double hazy IPA, they can feel really thick. So I noticed that the high ABV added to that mouthfeel, and possibly haze. If you're chasing haze, to me that's not as important. A milky beer, it doesn't sound that appetizing, but I like it kind of not clear, but I don't know. There's this weird balance between like milk and clear. It's like right in the middle. So yeah, that I think, adding. I think the for me it's been I think water chemistry is super important. You don't have to overdo it. I think the Whirlpool additions for hops, for hop flavor, crazy important. More so than dry hops. I think dry hops, you could even limit the amount of dry hops. That way you get more beer in the end. And I don't think you really need all that much if you add a lot to the Whirlpool side of things. And yeah, I think just letting it sit. Patience is always a good thing too with beer, I found. You want to drink it fresh, but it also, every single time I pour the beer, it gets better because you're pulling more from the, top of the, keg if you have if you're not using a floating dip tube. Mm-hmm. But yeah, every time I drink the beer, it just gets better. And then it crosses a threshold where, it's starting to not be as good. But yeah, patience is always good, I think, with homebrewer.
Well, there you go. Well, this has been fun. It was a blast having fun with you on producing the video, and
thank you for doing that again.
Being an actor, pulling. Mm-hmm. I have a minor in drama, so I can only play minor roles. So
only cameos.
But playing that and then seeing how it all came together, which was amazing, and then the thing about the video is that you, in addition to having fun and doing the parody and calling Stanley Kubrick, his style and things like that, there was actually information there. I mean, you could actually take notes from the video if you didn't have a link to the recipe, but you could actually learn something in addition to being entertained. So good job.
Yes. Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Well, all right. We'll have to look for another excuse to get back together again.
Yeah, I'm happy to come on whenever. And I'm maybe it'll be about a different style of beer. I'm working on a Keyser, building one of those. Who knows?
Yeah, I'm open.
Cool.
Well, thanks, Matt.
Appreciate it, James.
Well, thanks again to Matt. I may just take elements of Matt's recipe and make my own version, ferment it out on the porch with some Kvike this summer when it gets all hot, just to see what happens. Maybe I won't add nearly as much hops in the dry hopping. We'll see. Hops don't grow on trees. Well, they grow. Well, anyway, check out Matt's excellent video on the Brew Cabin YouTube channel if you haven't already. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dutz. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.